You good? Perfect. We'll call the meeting to order at 5:30. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes, March 27th.
I move to approve the minutes for March 27th.
I, Commissioner Kelly, second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
I,
Opposed? Motion carries. Oh, you one abstention.
I abstain as well. I could not get the file to open.
Okay. Next on the agenda is comments from the public. Is there anybody here from the public that would like to speak? I see nobody in the room. Is there anybody online? All right. Action items. Continuation of the public hearing for clear and objective housing text amendments. Tarek.
Yeah, thank you very much, Commissioner. For the record, Tarek Rawlings, I'm Senior Transportation Planner with the Community Development Department and the Road Department. And just like what was stated, tonight's a continued public hearing that follows our initial public hearing for the Title 17 Clear and Objective Text Amendments from March 27th. And this is basically following in line with just continued oral and written testimony. So having the record be open, I do have a couple of brief updates. I have printed versions of two written comments. One is from a public comment from Commissioner Cyrus, and one is a second public comment that's a follow-up comment from Daniel Robinson with Schwabe, Williamson, and Wyatt, who an initial public comment prior to the March 27th initial public hearing. And so those are being uploaded to the electronic record, but just so you guys have access to it, I've printed a copy each for you. So that'll be on the record website though here shortly. Really it's and then just to kind of rewind a little bit, there's you may have seen since the March 27th public hearing that we've uploaded the initial two written public comments into record. They're both from different legal entities. One's from Schwabe, Williamson, and Wyatt, and the other's from an individual named Rand Campbell, who's an attorney that also gave oral testimony at the last public hearing. So they're various concerns with just a series of provisions, basically either asking for discretionary language, changed language, or just expressing sort of general concern, I would say. And with that update, I'm available for any questions you might have and anything else that you may want to pursue during tonight's continued public hearing.
Great. Any questions? Commissioner?
Thank you. It's a very simple, generic type of question. In the definitions, there was a definition for lot width.
Okay.
But not length. Is there a reason for that?
I can't speak exactly to the exact process for the definitions module, but for lot width, there's certainly and likely within the Title 18, I'm sure a consideration was paid towards. There's a lot of record definition that has a minimum lot width, and so that is likely sort of a component definition for what at least could plug into that lot of record larger definition. I have not necessarily heard of lot length as a standalone definition within county code, but I can see that maybe the question would be what's the difference kind of a thing if one is east west or north south, or how that orientation lines up. But we have Will Groves here in case there's feedback about lot length.
Good evening, Vice Chair, Commissioners. Your Planning Manager, Will Groves. So when you're allowing lots to be created, sometimes there's concern about the developable area or trying to put some constraint on the way that lots are laid out, and lot width and lot depth are the two ways that are generally talked about. Sometimes those terms are used to get at to either allow or disallow flag lots, where you've got a narrow driveway that leads to a lot that's further back. And so you see those deployed in the code. We're trying to get away from those notions. It seems like the real problem that we run into is buildable area, making sure that, the lot isn't so narrow that it can't be plausibly created. It can't be plausibly built on unless you're living immediately next to Newport Market. And so you'll see in the code that there's a kind of a new approach to those definitions, both in the definitions module and in Title 17. And there's some places where, we generally tried to move away from it, but in some places the code required continued attention to that notion. In the end, we want lots to be usable and not foreseeably developable in some important way. And that's what we're trying to get at.
Great. Anybody else?
I'm not sure if this is the best time for the question or later, but I'm kind of curious about staff's comments or rebuttals to some of the public comment that we had. If you guys have a kind of response to any of those suggestions that we received.
I would say generally there's nothing to immediately refute. We're collecting public comment. So they're all valid concerns that will, be up throughout this process and ultimately with the Board of County Commissioners in mind. There's generally, I think, an approach that might be helpful in addressing any of these concerns. It seems like a lot of the concerns that have been outlined are asking for more flexibility or more discretion, or to restore some amount of discretion from what is now in the proposed amended text. And so one approach is to just restore some amount of discretion within, if it was a standalone single text amendment provision, that's just one rule or one provision, restoring some kind of discretion by using that two-track format. And so creating more flexibility by adding a discretionary track and creating a clear and objective track. So that's one approach that's really within the scope of this being a text amendment exercise, a language exercise that's just aimed at, creating clear and objective language, not necessarily maybe making the most ideal form of this code. It's really helpful. Like, a lot of the input we've got is aimed at creating kind of ideal code provisions that would produce ideal outcomes for housing development. But that's, some of those really extend past this, what I would say is the scope of this being a text amendment language compliant exercise under state law. And perhaps Will has some other things to add, but I would say a general approach is, restoring discretion through that two-track format is, it's not really a rebuttal, but it's something that would be responsive to some of these concerns.
Yeah, I think that's a great response. I think, at the outset, one of the things we were trying to avoid doing is closing opportunities. So, and there were times where we provided additional, if it said that, development needs to be orderly, we'd say, okay, what does orderly entail, and try to enumerate, okay, well, probably the traffic has to be right. This has to be some sort of something to deal with fire, something to deal with stormwater. And ideally in most situations, or in pretty much in all situations if possible, we were really trying not to close any options. And, of course, we're doing that from a perspective of a limited number of planners who've engaged with it. That's very much why we have this public process. So the comments that we've seen are very welcome. It's just we've from the experience and knowledge we have tried to create a clear and objective replica of the code wherever we could. And in some cases, somebody said, hey, you missed this. You accidentally foreclosed this option that I think people would actually like to use. In those cases, our general approach will be to restore those options. And just in the way that Tarek said, is to, the code becomes long as we do this, but that's not a thing that we need to avoid necessarily. And it's just, we say, okay, the old options are fully on the table and the new options are as follows. In some cases, we closed it down to a single option that we thought would deal well with all cases. And if somebody tells us it doesn't, boy, we're happy to fix that. I think the thing that we struggle with internally, and I think you and the board may struggle with in deliberations, is what I would think of as projects that are trying to change the way the code works. And anytime that we did try to create a kind of a single path through the code, we were changing the way it worked. And what we were trying to do, and you'll hear me use this metaphor kind of repeatedly, is what I would call skinny modifications, things that didn't seem to us that they would generate a lot of controversy or have a lot of public concern. That it's like, okay, we made a choice, but it was hopefully a small choice. When we start making big choices, it starts to look not like a language exercise, and it looks a lot more like a big policy question. I mean, if you were to get a room full of people who would like to make major changes to this code, you could, you could, I don't know if you'd fill the room, but boy, you'd have some passionate people about it, including everyone you see on this side of the dais. So, we definitely tried to exercise as much restraint as we could to make kind of big policy changes about how the code worked generally. So I think you're going to see some advocacy for, hey, the code should just work different, both for clear and objective and for the discretionary pathway. And we weren't able to completely shy away from it, but it's I think you've heard me also use the metaphor of the Christmas tree. You put on too many ornaments and it falls over. And the more policy choices we make, the bigger policy choices, the more likely that it's appealed, the more likely that what we really need to have is a 2-hour hearing about just that topic. And so there's an exit lane for that, which is that, we can identify that this is an important topic that you'd like to see come back in, spoilers, our next item, the work plan. So there are ways to these things that are not metaphorically skinny and are pretty, chunky, hefty changes to the code. There is a way to do that, and it's a kind of a standalone process. And certainly we came away with an interest in a few of those that you'll see us kind of in future work plans bring back to you and the board saying, hey, leftovers from clear and objective. We saw this, it's kind of broken. What do you think about revisiting it? But, and as a standalone issue where we can really flesh it out and get everybody to do a robust hearing and get their attention on this particular issue.
Great. Anybody else? Yeah, Commissioner.
So this goes a little further with Commissioner Curis, and then maybe just an add-on part of it. So this letter, just as quickly as I could speed read, based on our meeting, it's our understanding that the staff's intent is to further amend the proposed text amendment prior to the BOC hearing. And one is that the case? Are you guys thinking about massaging the verbiage a little more? And the second thing then would be, is that something that's regularly done after a PC recommendation?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, we in fact massage the language in response to the PC recommendation. So what we're doing now is conducting a public hearing where you receive information, and in this letter is one piece of that information. In our meeting, in the letter that was discussed, we said that, it would be anticipated that, and, I can't promise how you all will decide, but it would be anticipated that where, something that foreclosed an option accidentally and, there was a way to restore that you would generally be in favor of that. Again, I made clear that, I can't promise. There may be things that you have that are important to you as you look through this, but typically I would see us again at your discretion and very much open to your approach, that you would likely exit this process by noting that there were some concerns about options that were perhaps unintentionally foreclosed and recommending that the board and staff revisit those issues without us wordsmithing the particular fixes at this point. Again, not trying to get ahead of you. Other options are possible, but that's sort of been the recent pleasure of the Planning Commission on how to deal with these issues. And in particular, if some of them you're like, wow, it's really important to me / us that we fix this particular thing. We'd be glad to hear it. And if there's something that you got as far as this is so important that we really want to see the specific words, we should talk about that. That's, we have continued deliberations and for just those reasons.
Chair, I've got
Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
Commissioner.
If you covered this earlier, I apologize if I phased out. I'm just curious, as the July deadline approaches for clear and objective language, kind of if there's any update now that we're closer to that deadline, where other jurisdictions are chugging along, other jurisdictions that have affected lands or code language and so forth, and that are having to do the same kind of thing. And just generally speaking, I know that's a big question, and it doesn't have to be an exhaustive answer, but then also more specifically, if there's other, and again, if you've said this earlier, I apologize, if there are others that are doing this kind of 2-track approach.
Yeah, definitely. So this is, it's important to remember that this clear and objective requirement was effective in the cities for, years before it was accidentally applied and then intentionally not unapplied to us. And so, we have definitely people who've been down this path before. They have been through, to court on it and have tried different approaches. This 2-track approach is one of the ways that jurisdictions have approached it. Really, I think if we had all the time in the world and the patience, really a robust 1-track approach would be the ideal one, where it's, you come in, you check your boxes, you get your permit, And that, we use variances or other relatively rare tools rather than leaving a whole second track in the code. It just, in practice, those would involve so many policy choices that as we came into the kind of the July 1st deadline for this, we decided to maintain. And I think it makes the process easier for people to understand that, basically, to the extent that we've done it right, no options are being closed out, only options are being left open. It makes it relatively easy to move forward with this. Other jurisdictions are working. We have a number of sister counties who are working on this, but it's a handful. And so most jurisdictions in Oregon are doing nothing and sitting back and seeing how we do and how this plays through the courts. It'll be interesting. I mean, I think the bad version of this, and I think it requires a number of things to happen, is that first there has to be a rule, and then there has to be a developer that doesn't want to follow the rule, and then there has to be a developer that really doesn't even want to follow the spirit of the rule in some important way. And that I don't know how often that's going to come up. Most people, as they develop something, they want to make an attractive product, right? So it's not like they're going to, if it turns out that our ability to require septic systems is impaired by this clear and objective standard, it seems unlikely that, that people are going to try to develop lots, or DEQ regulations will pick it up if they try to develop them without septic standards. So I think that there's good reason to proceed apace. Your predecessors for decades have put rules in place to try and make sure that development's, safe, compatible, well thought out. And this is an effort to at least maintain that status quo for the time being. But it'll be interesting to see, to your point about how other jurisdictions experience this. I think that, the city of Bend, I think there's an example that they had a requirement that sewer lines be located close to a sidewalk, and a developer came in and said, close isn't clear and objective, therefore I can put them wherever I want. And that could be something that's trivial or something that's dangerous or, causes some other problem with other infrastructure. So it's going to take sort of a combination of a developer and a development need to see trouble with this. But I assume that, we're at the outset, as we coordinated with DLCD and received MIG consulting to help us with this, the notion is always that we've been trying to do triage here, that we've been trying to provide clear and objective pathways for basically those parts of the code that are used most often or seem most confusing or ambiguous, and really create ways that people can get through the system more easily. But man, the case law is moving, the legislature, sniffs around moving. I don't know if we're going to see any significant motion this year, but it'll be, when this hits all these jurisdictions, if, we see dozens of cases in LUBA about this and jurisdictions really struggling to maintain kind of public order, we may see action from the legislature. Conversely, if it's relatively quiet, this fix may be enough. We'll have to see how it goes.
Thanks, Will.
Great. Anybody else? Okay, great.
There's nothing further from this end. Yeah, the next steps really the planning commission could move to either continue the hearing to a date certain, and have another continued public hearing, close the hearing and leave the written record open to a date certain, close the hearing and set a date for deliberations, or close the hearing and commence deliberations. And that's assuming there's no other public comment or anyone online or anything like that.
Is there anybody online? Nope. Okay, and I see nobody in the audience. So, well, no public in the audience. So sorry. So what's your pleasure?
Question before I make a motion?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is there anyone in the commission that feels they need additional information prior to moving forward?
I guess I would suggest that we at least from a standard, just leave the record open for a week, just in case somebody has a second thought or any additional information, since that's our typical. And then, but yeah, I don't think we need more public hearing.
Alrighty then, Commissioner Williams, I would move to close the hearing, leave the written record open until end of business day next Wednesday, the 16th.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay. Commissioner Altman, is there any further discussion?
Do we want to set time for deliberation? I was just kind of like slowly getting my motion out and kind of stalled.
Sorry, I guess I would assume it would be the following week, but whether we need to set it or not, or leave it to staff to schedule it for us based on time.
Especially for the record, it would help probably just to clarify that on through a motion, just that deliberation date certain. The written record's very clear with that one, but typically, you're exactly right, Chair, that does fall on the next meeting. But just to be clear in the record, I would just belt and suspenders maybe recommend that we.
So I would friendly amend my own motion to close the hearing, leave the written record open until 5 p.m. April 16th, and set deliberations for the next meeting, April 24th.
I assume the seconder is good with that.
Yes.
So is there any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Commissioner Stockcamp, was that an aye?
He's frozen.
Oh, you froze
Yep,
up.
that's an aye.
So,
You look like.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Aye.
so any opposed? Motion carries. All right, next item on the agenda.
Thank you very much, Commissioners.
Peter, we have deliberations on work plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Peter Johnson, Community Development Director, joined by Will Groves, Planning Manager. And we prepared a short memorandum that reading out the projects that are noteworthy as we transition into fiscal year 26. Table 4 was our collective effort to the extent that it's helpful, allow you to identify priority discretionary, non-discretionary projects or zoning text amendments. We also included the panels to the extent that the Planning Commission wants to provide direction there. We've used this kind of framework in the past, but are very interested in any questions or comments that you have for us, and want really benefit from hearing from you which projects you really want to highlight and emphasize as resources and capacity become available. Obviously, you have projects under Table 2 are ongoing. There's not much discretion there in terms of our staffing of various committees and overseeing certain responsibilities, example being annual population estimates and ensuring that we're coordinating with Portland State University's Population Research Center. But there's zoning text amendments, there's obviously priority projects that are noteworthy. And, you know, I'm wanting to call those out, the Planning Commission's perspective on Newberry Country Update or Dark Skies, for example. Where does that fit into your thought process as resources from the Planning Division become available? And again, I'll just mention again, input that you have on panels, which, what are your top 1 or 2 that would be noteworthy to undertake this next fiscal year, I think would be helpful for Will's team. But I'll pause there. Will, I don't know if you have other remarks just as they begin giving us feedback, but want to give you that opportunity too.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, Commissioners. In prior years, your approach to this, and again, not to get ahead of you or to determine approach, has, if I recall correctly, has been sort of a group discussion about what's important to you. And I think that that's been well received and intelligible by the board. So, what I came out of in prior years was, the entire Planning Commission seemed very interested in X. 3 people were interested in Y. 1 person was interested in Z. And, so I took robust notes and carried forward kind of just the relative magnitude of interest in the projects. In years before that, we had formal motions, where, you agreed on, 1, then 2, then 3, and so moved that this is our priority. That was it proved relatively cumbersome, but again, open to whatever your approach is here. In the end, you're of course our citizen involvement body, and looking forward to carrying whatever preferences and will you have to the board, in a clear way. So appreciate your engagement with this, and however you'd like to proceed. I'm ready with my note sheet open.
Great, thank you. Anybody have an opinion on how you'd like to move forward?
It appears Commissioner Curis and I printed up the things and wrote some of our information in.
Okay.
So I did also email my bullets to Peter earlier today.
So it sounds like, well, we said table one is priority projects. Do you want direction on priority within that group, or shall we do this by table?
I think we're doing two.
Okay, I was pulling up.
And I think specifically, again, open to other approaches. I think table 4 in 3 parts. First, if you'll see in the comments section in the first row of that table, many of those items are things that, we're unlikely to be able to discard, like current planning. But specifically the ranking of dark skies, Newberry Country Plan, and kind of natural resource and hazard planning. As you think about it, it'd be good to get some feedback on, particularly the first two. Those are both things that we've heard significant interest from you and from the community. And in the end, one of them, will likely happen first, and the other one, may find itself, depending on staff availability, waiting for that to complete, or at least, coming in step with it. So maybe by row. So you see that there's the priority plan, the priority discretionary projects, zoning text amendments as a separate category, and then finally panels. If it was organized in that way, I'm well prepared for it, but could take that information other ways too.
Okay, so it sounds like, why don't we start with priority and non-discretionary projects? You've got certain ones that we don't have a choice on that are ongoing and required. What any thoughts on priorities within that? Yes, Commissioner.
So I feel like the kid who's been asking for the PS5 for like a number of years in a row, and like this year I'm not asking for anything else for Christmas. I'm just asking for Dark Skies. And so that's my number one choice of the group. I'm open to other people's ideas about number 2 and 3. Natural resources and hazards and Newberry Country Plan sound like important projects to me also, but I'm really highlighting my interest in seeing the Dark Skies project move forward, just because it's been on our agenda for so many years now, and there's just,
Like since you first got on the commission?
yeah, well, a few years after that. And also, like, let me just highlight the importance of urgency on that one, because the folks we had that came out on the Dark Skies panel made a really important point about how the sky is getting more and more lit up. And once that happens, it can't really go back. I mean, it would be really, really, really hard to get less lighting once the lighting's installed, and you could do it, but it would be a lot harder than figuring out how to develop things.
So why don't we do it this
Preemptively.
way? It's been suggested that that be our number one priority. And maybe, I know I've heard that over and over multiple times over the years. Maybe we'll do it by consensus. Does anybody have an objection to that being our number one position? Okay,
But
go
Oh.
ahead.
I'll just say my piece. I think, well, I am very, very much interested in Dark Skies, and it has been on the table for a long time. And I don't know anybody here who is opposed to it. I do see an urgency in natural resource and hazard planning. Just considering what we're seeing going on, nowhere in the country seems unaffected by natural hazards that have been happening within the past even 6 months. I think that, to me, that while I love the Dark Skies and I support the Dark Skies, looking at it from a public safety standpoint and what we can do in any way to mitigate natural hazards, I think that would be my first priority.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Mark?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with Vice Chair Altman. I did the 1 through 3, and my number 1 was natural resource and hazard planning. I mean, it's a different thing than what we have in Deschutes County, what we're seeing over in Burns right now with flooding. But we've got our own natural resources and hazards we need to plan for with wildfire and other stuff. So that took number 1 on my priority, was the natural resource and hazard planning. I believe in the importance of dark skies too, but that's just how I ranked it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Kelly.
Possibly for staff. I'm assuming, but could be wrong, that certain of these 3 topics, certain would take less time and others would take more time. And I'm assuming that dark skies takes less time, natural hazards and Newberry Crater take significantly. Am I correct in my assumption, or can you correct me? Can you give me some?
No, I think the natural hazards planning, that one, it's a little bit, it's not a defined particular deliverable at this time. We have a number of things that we've wanted to do in that category. It's with it, with the fire maps, being withdrawn, there's sections of our code that need to be patched so that, people don't have to build to higher standards that are left over in our code. So that would plausibly fall in that. You could see something as, more robust as trying to coordinate with our natural hazards mitigation plan. That's been a long time goal, to coordinate that plan that's run through the sheriff's department and make sure our code is supportive of it. You could also see, there had been some discussion about, if there isn't a statewide effort to take some action for structural hardening and defensible space, at least in discussions, the board had shown some interest about what local efforts might be appropriate in that space. So I think the interesting thing about natural hazards and planning is that it's a grab bag for a variety of things that might come up both out of the legislature and from board direction. But you are correct, that there may be sub projects as part of that. So, and you are correct that dark skies should be a relatively time limited engagement that, is a little more than housekeeping and probably a lot less than the comprehensive plan.
Okay, for that. Were you just gonna say, okay, for that. I would bring I don't know if we're just also.
Go ahead
Okay,
with your comments.
Dark skies first, because I feel like we kind of understand what that would look like. And I feel like the others are kind of huge projects to be taken on, and that I would rank dark skies first, because we kind of understand how to dive into that. And although I do think those other 2 topics are extremely important, and I sit here being like eeny, meeny, miny, mo a bit, but that is the reason why I would prioritize dark skies.
So you're suggesting start with potentially low hanging fruit.
That's what I would, yes.
Okay.
That's
Any
my
other
thought.
comments? No. Commissioner Karas.
Yeah, I'll just reflect back a little from what I heard from Will just now. There's the natural resources and hazards, so almost like 2 linked things. So I'm hearing that commissioners are interested in addressing hazards as specifically risk mitigation things. So if, unless I'm incorrect, it would be nice if that particular part of that sentiment got carried onto the board, rather than the topic as a whole. Natural resources and hazard planning is kind of a broad topic, but everyone's interested in risk mitigation, it seems, which I totally support. And the other comment is that dark skies is a natural resource. So from that perspective, it also kind of falls into that category. It looks like Peter might have something to say.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was contemplating offering some supplemental remarks ahead of Commissioner Kelly. You are correct that we bundled natural resource and natural hazard planning. I think for me individually, I think I'm prepared or foreseeing that what do we know today? It looks like the legislature in the subcommittees, they voted unanimously to repeal the statewide wildfire hazard map. And through Senate Bill 83, there's other provisions that provide local governments with the option of addressing, as Will noted, the wildland urban interface, fire hardening. The Department of Forestry would be compelled to do a kind of model code to help with defensible space And then there's incentives, there's resources that are baked into the bill, at least, with the expectation that resources would be mobilized to those wildland and urban interfaces. And that definition has been narrowed to basically focus on where rural residential areas coexist within, forested areas. So I think just for, if it's helpful for the planning commission, I think sometime this summer, late summer, staff is going to be obligated to go to, and I think it may come up organically by individual commissioners, because wildfire season will be, it may be just topic du jour, about what is the board's interest and sense of urgency to address this legislation in light of the fact that local governments have this option. So to your point, Commissioner Karas, about clarifying kind of how to further define this, if it's helpful, as you rank these, and I think you're correct that dark skies has been essentially vetted. There is a concept, if we can ever get Tanya the capacity, she's been targeted to do that work. That going back to Senate Bill 83 and what those potential outcomes, it would be helpful if the Planning Commission, as you rank that nebulous topic of natural resource and hazard planning, if you want to focus in as it pertains to the hazard planning and any outcome of legislation for local government, I'm giving way too much language, but if there's opportunities for local governments to consider resiliency related to hazards, you could further state whether or not where that priority fits in to the rest of those priority or priority discretionary, non-discretionary projects. The other natural resource piece, just for the record, was talking about groundwater protection. I'm not seeing that being an eminent responsibility as of right now, but we identify that as coordination that needs to occur with our partners in the city of La Pine in several aspects. There's some legislation also that we're tracking, but I don't think it has quite the urgency that hazard planning does. So anyway, I offer those remarks to the extent that that's helpful and you want to coalesce around hazard planning as where it fits in the prioritization, and then we can communicate that to the board accordingly. Because I think it would be beneficial for them to hear what the Planning Commission's thoughts are on natural hazard planning as we understand what may be possible through legislation in this legislative session. So thanks for taking all that in consideration, but I think that provides a little bit more context than the bulleted marks
Right.
or remarks today.
Commissioner Williams.
So I have a couple of different items to address. So like dark skies, I'm fine with that being up there. For me being South County, the Newberry country update is important to me. The groundwater issues we're dealing with, the drying wells we're dealing with, the huge chunk of land that the county is looking to sell to the city of La Pine. And all three Darlene fires have been on BLM, but that in general. However, with the Newberry Country Plan, there is already an assembly of people working on it, doing what they need to do. I just want to make sure that we keep it at the forefront, because things that can be done that we're discussing about the wildfires, about the homeless on, public lands, and the dangers and everything associated with that, opportunities possibly also, as well as groundwater, can be applied across the county. So that being said, what we might need to start doing is like looking at Sun River. They are an approved dark skies neighborhood. What type of text amendments do they have in their bylaws for building and things like that? Are there other counties that have adopted dark sky rules that we can kind of look to for guidance? Instead of reinventing the wheel, why don't we just copy one?
Wales. Well, here's a thought. Why don't we go through them? Start with the dark skies, And we'll show of hands who wants that to be the number one position. And then we'll go to the next one and we'll just go through them one at a time and see if that makes sense.
And Peter, disregard my numbers, my number ordering.
So with that, everybody by show of hands, who wants to do dark skies as number one priority? So, okay, we got 2, 4, and I'll vote with that as the number one, partly because I think I agree it could be a very short one that may not take a lot of time and one we continued forward forever. So we show 5 in favor of that. So dark skies would be the number one choice. And now that leaves us with the Newberry and the resource and hazards, natural resource and hazard planning. You want to do the same process with that for the number 2 position and number 3 position? So all those in favor of we'll just do the natural resource and hazard planning as the number 2 position. Or number 2 priority. Well, actually 3, 4, 5, and I'll vote with that one. So, yeah, it's got Mark. So
Yep.
that's 6. And that would leave by default the Newberry unless anybody doesn't want to do it. Does that make sense? Okay. Is there any of the others on this that are optional that we need to address, or are the rest of those already ongoing and required? It sounds like, well, they're
Good.
we have priorities for that one.
Thank
So the next one would be zoning text amendments.
Can I ask a quick
And
question?
we have a
to
whole
Peter?
lot of those.
Mark has a question.
Oh, Mark, go ahead.
My curiosity is, and maybe it was answered in the past when I wasn't on commission, what's the intent with the dark skies? Is it like for Deschutes County to become a dark sky recognized place, or is it just to incorporate code? I guess I'm just curious, what's our goal to accomplish with dark skies discussion?
Oh, thank you. It has been a while since we've talked about this. So, at the outset, as we kick off a project, those are, obviously open to discussion in terms of scope. In communications with the board and the public and our internal departments, without again presupposing an outcome, the notion is that this was kicked off initially because of a public interest in increased protection for dark skies, as well as some difficulties we were having in code enforcement, logistical things, color temperatures and wattages that were developed before we had LED bulbs. And so what there seems to be broad consensus for in the discussion would be a modernization of the code that came down largely to disallowing in most circumstances lights that project either up or onto your neighbor's property. So some sort of upward shielding, trying to keep the light on property, with reasonable exclusions of safety and holiday lights and that kind of thing. And moving away from trying to figure out the wattage of the bulb as much. And in doing that, Tarek did a extensive research project looking at a variety of jurisdictions, how they approach this. One of the things that is advocating for that, but again, is not, determinative of that process in the future, a relatively simple approach is that, it doesn't seem at this time that we're going to see dedicated funding or resources for enforcement associated with this. So you could imagine there's some jurisdictions that, we would, to achieve their program, we would want to have 1, maybe 2 FTE. Driving around at night, knocking on doors, a program to give out light bulbs or, shields for them. And at least at this point, discussions to date doesn't seem that there's an appetite for that level of coordination. And also, so moving towards something that's relatively simple, your light should be not visible off property and shouldn't be pointed at the sky, seems like something that we can communicate to people and that we can regulate towards. And, we're thinking a lot about enforcement. If somebody's got a complaint, can we send a letter to the property in effect and say, hey, there's a concern about one of your bulbs. There's a rule, please do something about it. So trying to hit a sweet spot between achieving outcomes and, the resources that we have to deploy. These things will always compete with, active exploding septic systems that have sewage on the ground. So, doing more with less is going to be a big part of that project. And, to the extent that it goes forward, we would be looking to the Planning Commission and the board to calibrate that that level of effort and sort of the amount of ask that we have for the public versus the benefits that we get for the sky.
So does that answer your questions, Mark?
Yeah, I appreciate that input. I just wanted to add on to what Tony was saying earlier about Sun River. I believe the whole city of Sisters is now recognized as a dark sky place. So maybe just recommending talking with Sister City Council just to figure out what they did to get that passed and approved. So, yep, those are my thoughts.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess I would add, I mean, Will did a nice job of explaining it, but perspective, public comments, different listening sessions, dark skies has been one of the common themes that's come up, and I think the whole idea of us taking a look at it is deciding where we want to go with it.
Mhm.
You know, there's certainly those that would like to see Central Oregon be black at night, and you know what's practical, what makes sense. I mean, I think that's part of what we need to discuss is this a voluntary education based process, or this regulations and code enforcement turning people's lights off or whatever. But I mean, I think that's the whole point is for us to take a look and see what makes sense from a community standpoint. Oh, Commissioner Karras.
And one other quick addition, in case it wasn't clear, like we already have a dark skies ordinance and it's already subject to enforcement policies and all kinds of other things. It's just that, as Will said, there's some issues with it that could be cleaned up, and this isn't really a discussion about whether we're going to have an ordinance and enforce it or not. It's like, could the ordinance be updated to make it easier and less, could be possibly less restrictive and regulated, could be simpler regulations. So I don't really want to leave the conversation with the impression that this is like a regulations or not type of conversation, because it's already regulated.
Anybody else?
How can we make it look more attractive?
Next one is zoning text amendments. Now, what's the background? These are ones that would be brought forth by the planning commission.
So
Or is this-
all of these are carryovers from prior years. They're things that either citizens, the planning committee, or the board has expressed interest in seeing fixes. And all of them have been, at least they haven't been either shiny or on fire enough to merit being pushed to the front of the line. And there's a long list of them there. I can give you kind of some detailed descriptions for those, but these are all carry forwards. I think most of them are on their third year before you. These are the things that we always mean to get to and have struggled to find the resources to address. So let me know if you have questions about specific ones of these. Yes.
Commissioner Williams.
Number 10, the road projects.
Yeah, certainly. So Title 19 to 21 Road Standards Update. So this is we have a thing in our code in Title 18 and Title 19 talking about road class projects, and things are classified. These are Class 1, Class 2, or Class 3 road projects. And with Class 1 and 2 requiring land use permits, while Class 3 don't. So the notion is that some projects are resurfacing, repairs. They don't require citizen involvement, where other projects probably merit some sort of engagement to get people's opinion about how they should be operated. And so the issues that we've run into as either outright or permitted, and they don't list projects as outright permitted or conditional uses. And while Title 18 thinks about street projects to include cars, bicycle, pedestrian pathways, the language in Title 19 doesn't match it. And so there's a presumption at this point that even Title 19 might accidentally preclude the creation of bike lanes or pedestrian facilities as part of a road or street project. So there's a variety of issues that are associated with this. This has been something the road department's been interested in sometimes seeing fixed. If you try to read the code together, no reasonable person could make sense of it. And we've operated as best we could in that absence, but it seems that it would merit having some sort of systemization about, when do we involve the public for road projects, and what do we mean to allow without that engagement.
Yes, excuse me, Peter, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, and I don't mean to get ahead of the planning commission. these text amendments, as Will noted, and as the planning commission recognizes, they've been on the list for some time. And what the planning commission has done in previous years, when, they all kind of have equal weight, is you have communicated that they all seem worthwhile for undertaking, and you essentially communicate that you defer to the county to determine which ones should be prioritized. The reason why I mentioned that is, outdoor mass gathering has been on there for some time. We haven't had an outdoor mass gathering event since COVID. We know that it needs revisions, but its sense of urgency is different than maybe the road project that Will just summarized. So you are certainly welcome, and we can summarize each of these text amendments we have in your previous packets. But I'm just giving you an out as you've utilized in the past. If you want to rely on staff and colleagues in current planning who administer these codes on a regular basis, and sometimes you'll get input from the board or from the development community to provide that kind of discretion to determine which ones warrant a legislative amendment on behalf of staff. So by all means, you are welcome to rank these, but I'm just underscoring that you don't have to, and you could defer to staff to determine which ones are the most suitable based on the capacity to undertake these amendments. So,
Yeah. Commissioner Williams.
Would there be a matrix that would say like which one of these is the oldest versus which one is the new, most important or most urgent? And then maybe staff takes that route because the oldest ones deserve to get pushed through. But if there is something that's a little more urgent, maybe it jumps the line.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable approach. Also, it's note that the updates to match our code to childcare opportunities have been in prior years interested to this commission and also to the board. That one seems to have been a consistent one that has consistent interest in associated with it. Another one that's been sits kind of just over the horizon in terms of projects that actually get greenlit is a change to our code that has to do with lot line adjustments and the limits and changes that you can make to lots through lot line adjustments. So we've talked about this previously, but we have a local rule that's associated with this, with limiting lot line adjustments in certain circumstances. We made that code decades ago, and in the interim, state code has stepped in and really dealt with that in a much more robust and sensible way. And when our local code and that state code interplay currently, it produces some counterintuitive results for landowners, particularly for farmers in a scenario. Let's say that I have 40 acres and my neighbor has 80, and I want to receive their back 40 so that I'm the one with 80 now. The code is unusually obtuse about it, and it doesn't come up very often, but it seems, at least, without to get ahead of that whole process, it seemed unfortunate at times where people were precluded from engaging in sort of transfer of beneficial farming activity because of a rule that, is a residual rule that we have. So those two have come up with some regularity and have shown some interest from either the public or the planning commission. Something that's moved up in line. Certainly there's like things like the forest code update. We're required to follow state law, but right now our local version of the forest code has gotten so out of sync that it'd be very confusing to a good faith reader of the code. They'd have to know that our code is antiquated and go to state law and then figure out how that plays into the local code. So some of these things are user improvements, but in terms of really unlocking something that feels like it's gotten stuck, and certainly the childcare amendments, the 10% farm and lot line adjustment rules, and also there'd been an interest in this from this planning commission about self-service farm stands. You see those in many communities, and our code doesn't deal well with those. And there had been some interest for those. I could go on at some length of all of those, but those ones seem most likely to really help people most directly of these things, have had the most sustained interest.
I guess unless somebody has a better idea, I would kind of go along with what Peter has suggested, and it's allow staff to, based on current events and priorities, I mean, poke things in as they fit and or, are kind of top of the radar. I'm sure some of these were probably hot button issues 5-10 years ago that maybe have kind of fallen out of or off the radar at the moment. And I would personally, defer to staff to bring us what you think is most appropriate and necessary in a timely manner. Commissioner Williams.
So like number 3, defining a family for unrelated persons, that's fairly new.
Yeah, that one's arrived fairly recently. And briefly, the state statute, under state statute, we're no longer allowed to say who's allowed to live in a structure based on their familial relations. Historically, one of the ways that we dealt with occupancy is that we had a rule that said that you could have any number of family members in a house, or you could have 5 unrelated people in the house. And now, because the state statute precludes us from using familial relations as the basis for occupancy, I'll cover my mic here. There's very little to preclude someone from putting a huge number of people in a house. If I wanted to get a house in Deschutes River Woods and rent it out to 30 of my closest friends, there's nothing that really says you can't. So so that's something that's, but occupancy is a tough topic, when you start telling people who can and can't live in their personal dwelling. I think we all know that there shouldn't be 30 people in there, generally speaking, unless, they have some very robust septic facilities. And at the same time, setting that line has been very controversial in other jurisdictions. People try things like, setting it based on the building occupancy, which is doesn't have a clear path forward. Sometimes setting it on septic infrastructure, septic sewer infrastructure. Other places, it's 2 people per bedroom plus 2 is a really common formula. But in the end, I think there's going to be people, including myself, who are squeamish to say that someone who has a large family or somebody whose family members fall on hard times, that suddenly you've got too many people in your house. And at the same time, we don't want their septic systems to explode. So that's also a robust topic, but is likely to be controversial.
Great, Commissioner Williams.
I was just going to say I agree with Peter and let the staff do what they think is most urgent, oldest, and I'm fine with that.
Commissioner Karas.
Yeah, I had marked childcare just because, talk with various people from the community who are first-time parents with young children. And it's like dire. We really don't have enough childcare here. So if there's something we can do at the county level, I know there's a city thing too, but if there's something we can do to make just even a few more people eligible to have a childcare facility, that would go a long way to helping people. And that childcare is like one of those things that you help that thing and it helps this other thing and this other thing. It's like affects the whole community ecosystem. So,
and that one's a little bit warmer in that a couple months that had been a consistent interest from the Planning Commission and board. And a couple months ago, when we had a brief slowdown, we turned one of our planners loose on looking at what that fix might look like. And so we actually have a little bit of a running start on that one. So that's one that likely, under the way that you formulated this, as I understand it, we come to the board periodically to say, hey, we've got some additional resources. When last we talked, you were interested in X, Y, and Z. Childcare had been a consistent interest from both you and the Planning Commission. Here are some other ones. What do you want to see us chase, board? So that's how we approach that. It sounds like on this one, with the exclusion of childcare, no strong preferences about leaning on any of these, or maybe not leaning on them at all and leaving it to kind of staff and board discretion. We're well equipped to do that.
Okay.
Not to overemphasize, but and I 100% agree, staff, I trust you, and yeah, but I do like this childcare thing. I was just like, whoa. And what I think that does is it allows both parents to get back to work, which I think is huge. And it was very challenging in our household. And so that jumped in. The other thing I just want to just mention is what I have seen farm stands do in community is bring community together and create these sense of neighborly interactions that rural community doesn't always get. So I've just noticed that firsthand. And so I just want to kind of put a plug in that for two. But I'm with you that I think that I support staff's decision.
I also agree with Commissioner Kearse about childcare. I remember when we've talked about this before a few times. And I do agree also with Commissioner Kelly that it's really important. So if we were to elevate anything, I think I would like to see that, but I also agree with everybody else that staff knows their resources best, and I trust staff.
Any other comments? So I think the general consensus is that you've got some specific opinions on areas that we'd love to see or discuss, but we'll defer to your judgment on if and when you bring stuff to us.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a different opinion? Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Panels. Does anybody have an opinion on the panel discussions? Oh,
Let her go first.
oh,
Okay.
Sorry.
Kelly.
I would just like to, and this is just throwing it out there as another bullet point, but I have been thinking about housing lately, and I'd love to know more about, and what I'm thinking about how it pertains to the county is, we're seeing these Sisters UBG expansion, we're seeing Bend have these pocket UBG expansions, and demand, supply, projections, affordable housing. I don't know how exactly you would format it, but I do think that it's a topic that we hear often and it affects the county. So it's something I would personally be
So you're
interested in.
suggesting maybe a panel on housing?
That's my suggestion.
Oh, Commissioner Williams.
If we do a panel on groundwater, I'm interested in canals, instead of 100% cap, just an over cap, not an under cap. Has that ever been considered? It's something that allows some of the water to, penetrate back without going all the way to the end of the line, but we don't have the evaporation. I don't know anything about it. My husband shoots the canals with concrete sometimes, so I'm familiar with it, and that's about it.
Okay, Commissioner Kearse.
So I think I got a lot out of our water panel before when we did it, and that was a long time ago when it was just happening when I just joined the commission. Actually, we may have had two, but the first one was right when I just joined the commission. I got a lot out of it. I learned a lot. I learned a lot of things that contradicted things that I thought were true from scientists, and I was like, oh, okay, never knew that. So I think that'd be great to do again. I'm still interested in learning more about destination resorts and mule deer, but I do have a concern that we also had a citizen, Ms. Gold, raised, which I'm really kind of, I guess I want to just make the point that the quality of these panels probably depends on who we invite to come speak. And I'm really not interested in having any panels that are just divisive. I think we had a really robust community input on both destination resorts and mule deer. We know people have strong opinions that can be sort of polarized. I don't think that Commissioner Cyrus's suggestion that we have this is to just have another polarizing discussion. I felt like your suggestion was that we have an instructional, educational, nerdy type of discussion. And I really would like to do that, but I'm just a little concerned about basically what I'm saying is let's not do a polarizing discussion. And is it possible to have a very technical, nerdy, instructional panel on either of these two topics? And just want to get my fellow commissioners and even staff's ideas about is this possible? Can we do this? Or is it just going to turn into kind of a similar experiences, the public testimony that we had, which was very valuable to me, by the way. It's just, I don't feel the need to repeat it again so soon.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I had the same kind of question. There's one that guys specifically with mule deer. I mean, I like learning more about wildlife all the time. We've got, scientists for research, that kind of thing. I love learning that kind of thing. That would be a meeting I'd be sure not to miss. But on the other hand, we did have a robust process in terms of updating the overlay, and the decision of the board was to end the process, as I recall. And we still have an outdated overlay language on the books right now that I'm not trying to make an opinion here, but just an observation. I think it's outdated and could use some updating. And we have the same board, and much as I'd like to hear about mule deer, I'm not sure I want to do the same thing again either. And I can anticipate where maybe with a different board or a extended board not too far down the road, that they may want to have an updated overlay discussion, and having an intermediate discussion in between the one we had and the one we're likely to have again, if a new board is interested in updating that overlay, could be of value, maybe of value. Certainly I would learn from it. I just don't know if we would exhaust the process or individuals that might want to provide information or come and present. I'm thinking of like OEF and W people that might have felt scorched a little bit by the last process or how it ended. But anyway, it's just on my mind. I'm just throwing it out there. I would love to hear about mule deer, but I don't want to have a process that's either redundant or counterproductive.
Commissioner Williams.
So not talking public hearings, talking panels. I would love to hear about golden eagles, the nesting, the protection of them. I know we've talked briefly about them, but I would be very interested because they nest here. And just as an aside, driving down Highway 97 to La Pine the other day, there was a dead mule deer that was way off the side of the road. And you see all these ravens just chompy, chompy, chomp. And as I'm driving by, there's a big old bald eagle in the middle of them all.
You should see my my field if we haven't. But no, I mean, maybe my input a little bit with regard to the water. Part of my thought was, especially we've got a new water study that just came out that said we're sitting on one of the largest underground aquifers in the world. We've got, I mean, a lot of new data has come out since a lot of the other discussion. There's discussion about everything from juniper trees to piping to wells that are going dry. And I thought, maybe get away from a lot of the, the public furor over rumors and misconceptions. If we have a panel of experts that can address very specifics, whether it's a guy that's done, research on juniper use and what kind of impact that, a 10-fold increase in juniper trees might be affecting water aquifers or whatever. I mean, just more of a facts and figures and more of a professional type discussion where we can ask questions and, the public can come and observe, but not taking testimony and public comment, unless, and that's however we decide we want to do it. I could even see where we might be open for some written questions from the public that maybe the panel could address too. I mean, kind of however we decide we want to set it up. Mule deer, kind of the same thing. I wasn't looking at readdressing overlays and restrictions so much as how about maybe we dig into some basic facts and figures that, questions that didn't get answered during the public process. For example, what is the impact of predators versus, some of the other, maybe dig in a little deeper into the statistics of what's happening to them. Maybe there's some other solutions, be it highway crossings or whatever. Just more of a fact-finding type panel as question and answer, and find some folks that can answer the questions. And the same thing, destination resorts. It's kind of a hot button topic for a lot of people. For everything from economics to water use to whatever, it's been since the 90s, since it's actually even been discussed on a more factual basis. What is the impact? What's the housing? What's the economic impact? Real numbers. What's water use? You know, is it a huge water use? Is it more conservation oriented than agriculture or city streets? Or, I mean, where is it play out? I mean, more of a facts and figures and, you know, question and answer, and, you know, let's find some people who can come in and address everything on a factual, non-emotional basis. You know, and that was kind of my thought with the panels.
Matt, can I ask you, I mean, if somebody were to ask us individually or collectively, and this all sounds great to me, but why are we looking at purely informational or educational panels? What's the context? Is it in the larger context of our role as citizen involvement, or is it in the context of these issues may come up in text amendments or overlays? Or if it's just purely educational, informational, why would the Planning Commission be the appropriate body to host those sessions?
I guess all three. I mean, public information. I've heard it over and over at different hearings. I mean, people will go on about this topic or that topic. I mean, stuff that I've seen, documents and studies to the contrary, but the basic public belief is in a soundbite that they've heard somewhere. You know, well, why not? I mean, we're the body that has to wade through the information, and I mean, both from a public input standpoint, if they want to come and listen themselves, and from an education standpoint, and I mean, just kind of fact finding.
Okay, I'm comfortable with it. If staff is comfortable with it, staff's time is always a constraint. And if staff can think of a language or justification that couches educational, informational sessions in terms of furthering our potential future work in that broader context. Yeah, I like that.
I mean, for example, the legislature's got, and even some of our county, I mean, we're going to be seeing in the next session is some discussion about asking for engineers report on, you know, that they're willing to sign off that there will be no measurable drop for 50 years. I mean, is that even a reasonable discussion to be having based on what experts might say? I mean, I have an opinion on it, but, you know, maybe somebody else can explain why what I think is wrong. So, Commissioner Kelly.
Yeah, I think this is all great conversations. One thing that I like the idea of this panel as being teasers for future discussions or future work agendas, so that we are educating, you know, ourselves in preparation for things down the line. And so that's what I'm kind of excited about, is not coming into some of these work plans with a little more knowledge than I would have before. So that's kind of, if that can be a thought process, if that can be thought of too, is like.
So, Commissioner Karas?
Yeah, so the way I've been thinking of it is like analogous to like basic research. Like this is like we don't have anything to apply it to right now, but we're just trying to get a basic education in these things so that when we do have something to apply it to, we have a way of contextualizing things. The aquifer is a really good example, or me learning, you know, that 93 or 90 something % of water is actually used for agriculture, not residential purposes. That was mind boggling to me when I first learned that. So I think like just basic facts can set you up to digest public comment and like help you contextualize it better. And the other question I just have for fellow commissioners is, would you guys rather, if we had time, so all of this is just pending time and staff's time, of course, but if we had time, would you guys rather learn more about mule deer, like go more in depth and detail, or would you rather pick a different species like golden eagle and just learn? I mean, I'm also interested in sage grouse, but just, you know, learn about another relevant species that, you know, the habitat of which is affected by land use. What do you guys want?
I'm open to any, I mean, the only reason I should throw out mule deer is when we finished the mule deer process. I know there was discussion around, well, can we continue this topic another time and can we address it deeper? And once we finish that, and sure, I mean, maybe have a panel but I'm open to whatever ideas you've got.
Would could we do a wildlife panel where or would we not do justice to a specific, because I'm like fascinated with wolves right now too. So like if we made it broader, would that be, I don't know, I'm just.
It could help.
throwing it out there. Or would that
I
not give them enough attention to one specific animal?
So like the overlays we have are mule deer, elk, eagle, we have the sage grouse, and on my paper, I had written elk or eagle. And it is great to learn about all the wildlife, but I think to focus more on that which we actually have land use recommendations to make. And right now, I don't think the county has any wolf anything.
Hopefully we don't have a wolf overlay coming. So, comments, thoughts?
And then all I had to say was from my notes from last week, I did write housing, housing, housing.
Okay, well,
Or from
and
2
that
weeks
could
ago.
certainly be another panel and maybe we want to put that one first as a housing panel.
Yes, I was just saying that I supported Commissioner Kelly. I had it on last meeting's notes.
So you want to do this same way we did last time? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to chime in because I haven't said anything yet. I remember I was here for the water panel, the second one, not the first one that you were at. I was here for the water panel. I thought that was very good. And Chair Cyrus brings up a good point in that we really talked about the mule deer panel because I think during the public testimony and the deliberations for the Goal 5 wildlife inventory update, there's a lot of debate about, the code versus the mule deer and the habitat loss and, why are the mule deer in decline and all of that. So I think that's what started us again wanting more or even having just one more panel to bring together because they're different people because there was so much debate. This group is saying this and this group is saying that, and somebody didn't, I think ODF&W didn't show up or something. And so it's, people make the best decisions they can with the information that they have. And I think that more clear factual information would have benefited everybody. So I'm always in favor of anything wildlife related. I would, for me, elevate that, although I do find all of the topics interesting. So I don't know that I would necessarily have a ranking, but I'm happy to talk about it, how we want to rank them.
By consensus, do we want to add a fourth category on housing?
Sure.
Okay. So let's just go down through the like we did last time and start with water resources and have a show of, or Commissioner Stopkamp, did you have any comments before we move on?
Really the only thing my emphasis is water resources. That's my top one. And I'm in agreement with really what all the commissioners are saying, where I'm interested in various other wildlife species. I think the elk is a great one too, especially with what came up in the mule deer sessions with how the relationship that mule deer and elk have with each other. And I agree with the housing too, that's an important topic. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
Okay. So let's start with water resources and maybe we'll do a show of hands on who thinks that should be the first priority. All those in favor say aye, or raise your hand, sorry.
Can I have a comment real quick?
Certainly.
So with these topics, and one for me, destination resorts is not my priority, and I feel it's because we're kind of maxed out in the county for destination resorts coming in. We're kind of at that. We got the one big contentious, and maybe not. Small ones can be put in all these little lots if they were all pieced together. So it's not my priority. But I think this might be a little different, as to who we can get, when we can get them. And I would almost just recommend, my thought is just, again, let the planning division say, hey, these are the things we would like to do. And maybe they can kind of match them up with things that are in the future agenda. So maybe we can tie it together that way. That's a thought, but I'm fully willing to rank.
Yes, Will.
Thank you. If I might, we've shown a ability twice to have a good water panel. And so when if you said we wanted to have a water panel, I'd be like, I know what to do about that. I know how to get people who can speak factually on that. And although what we should do about water seems to be really polarizing, there doesn't seem to be a lot of inherent, anger about those facts. I think that's something that lends itself to a panel. I think housing, I would be fascinated if you summoned a housing panel, just how we do housing in Oregon, where it's being developed, where population trends are going, what the cities are building in response to that, how UGBs work. That's something that, I've gotten to see a fair bit of and still would love to hear experts kind of say, where have we been? Where is it going? How's it working? Those two, I feel very ready. If you were to give a green light to either of those two, I would know how to do those two. Some of the other ones, getting together, and I would be also very excited for specific species wildlife panels, but I'm not sure that, it might be tricky to get kind of a robust, it might be tricky to get a robust panel on some of those. So just my 2 cents, those two, one we've shown an ability to do, the other one, I have a pretty good idea how we would do it. The other ones, if you're excited, we'll figure it out.
Okay.
Can I,
Certainly, go ahead.
can I vote that we say both of those would be great panels and that we would like to see both of them elevated? That would be because I kind of like, I would vote yes to either one of those.
I think if we do Sheriff Cyrus's process, it might come out that, sort of like there's a tie, like you might get like 4 people voted for one as the number one and 3, we could see, I don't know.
So yeah, why don't we just start? And what I'll do is maybe we'll reverse the order, and we'll ask who thinks we should do a housing panel as the number one priority based on comments, and then we'll work through the others. So, show of hands, who wants to prioritize a housing panel? Okay, we have 2 votes. Destination resorts, show of hands. Okay. Mule Deer.
As the number one, right?
Yeah, as the
Voted
number
as
one
the
choice.
Number one choice.
Wildlife.
Some kind of wildlife panel.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. So water resources. Everything's lukewarm. I was going to say a lot of people didn't vote at all. So we have 2 votes. You voted, Commissioner Stockamp, you voted for the water resources?
Yes.
And I'll support the water resources as number. So that would have a majority with 3.
Slight margin.
Yeah.
Notably slight margin.
And the other one that got, oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's all right. Sorry, to interrupt. Just a couple comments, I guess. The one is that, I agree with some of the comments in my company. All of these are potentially interesting and all of them are, priorities. Kelsey to say, they're all important to us. But, I don't know, my own reason for, I don't know, not knowing whether I want to raise my hand or not on those is more because in the, I don't know, relatively thin space between, staff expertise and awareness of resources and timing and so forth, which is always going to be better than mine anyway, certainly. And on the one hand, and then also constraining that thin zone where we're effective, realizing that, we make simply recommendations to a governing board that's going to have their own opinions on priority and so forth. My own comfort level is just in saying, yeah, these look appropriate. There's none there that I would say shouldn't be there. So that's why I didn't raise my hand. And the other comment, if I may,
Certainly.
Was I recall one item that we used to talk about a year or 2 ago, and I didn't know whether to bring this up in connection with non-discretionary projects, maybe even text amendments or even a panel, presumably. Peter, was something I think you used to talk about, especially I don't know if you call it a zone, a high desert zone, which was kind of a fascinating idea. I thought had a lot of potential. And maybe my colleagues disagree, but it was something I'd still like to sort of keep on a front burner somewhere, maybe a mid-range burner, if appropriate. My colleagues were interested in that. Anyway, those are my two.
Okay, thank you. So if we continue this process, we've, by a very small margin, water resources, and there was some interest also in the housing. So show of hands, who would like to see that as at least a close second?
Housing?
For housing, yes.
You already voted, Kelsey.
No, we're voting on number 2 right now, right?
Can I
Yeah.
vote again?
Yeah. So
Yes,
everybody
you
gets
can
to
all
vote
vote
again.
again.
We can vote, Tony.
Housing.
So 3,
Well,
4, 5,
If we're water resources 1, housing 2,
yes.
that's.
Okay.
Mark also.
And I guess
You.
for the others, I would ask, is there an interest in, if time permits, taking a look at the other options too? Okay,
Yep.
by consensus, we've got a list of topics we'd love to hear more about, but the top 2 would be water and housing.
Excellent. Thank
And I would second Commissioner Hovecamp's comments on the high desert zone. And quite frankly, I'd love to see a robust discussion on just if we've got a lot of zones that maybe need to take a serious look at, be it, I mean, small, 2-acre EFU zones that maybe shouldn't be EFU zones and that type of thing. And, maybe there's some more of a collective 10,000 foot look at zones in general on what makes sense in the county. I mean, if there's interest in that kind of a much broader, bigger discussion. So,
I was just going to.
Oh, go ahead.
You may just say one more thing. I think what I also wanted to bring up as a point before is that I see this as another way to drum up public interest and public participation. And obviously water and housing are they actually go together when people bring up the topic of development within the county. So I think those are appropriate priorities for the county. And I hope that they will bring a lot of public participation or engagement.
Okay. Yeah, Peter.
Planning commissioners, before we transition to the next agenda item, I just want to see if my notes or our notes align with the planning commission's direction. And I'm sorry, I'm going back to the priority projects. This was, you would rank them, dark skies, and then I wanted to see if, and I'm taking some liberties here, but so you can correct me. But for number 2, it was really which is a broad category, natural resource, natural hazards. The emphasis was really, and this is my characterization, so I am taking some liberties. If the board directs staff to, if this becomes a priority for the board, it would be revisiting legislation relating to wildfire that's focusing on the wildland urban interface, defensible space, fire hardening, and incentives and resources that can help make Deschutes County resilient. I'm really putting a lot of descriptive language there, but I that was what I may have leaned on you to kind of see if that was what you were expecting, but is that a fair characterization of why it was number 2? It's focusing on the issue of resilience as it pertains to wildfire, knowing that there's a lot of legislation that's in place today, but to the extent that this becomes noteworthy for a conversation and something more, that the commission recognizes that's an important topic. Is that close?
I guess,
Too much?
personally, I mean, I was looking at a little broader category, whether including wildfire, flood, earthquake, for example. I mean, there's certainly some preparedness Deschutes County is going to have if they have, when they have the big one on the other side of the mountain, and whether we're prepared for that. I mean, that may not be directly land use, but just a general hazard.
And I had written down mitigation.
I'll come back up, or we'll come back up. Sorry for,
I mean, if we get directed to focus on a specific one, I guess I was thinking in broader terms, just in general hazard, whether it floods, snow. I mean, we have more snow hazards than we do fire hazards
True.
or power outage type stuff or preparedness or kind of whatever that might be.
thank you.
I agree.
Anybody else?
I agree. Excuse me, just more general. I wasn't thinking at the level you were thinking. I was just, how can the county have a leadership role in whatever natural disaster? I mean, obviously we have to, hurricanes, probably not likely. But no. So not down to the detail that you were talking about, just general overall.
And like the last big snowfall that we had down south about 3 weeks ago, maybe, there was parts of Lapine that were out of power for almost 2 or 3 days. And then the big windstorm we had last week, probably lost 6, 7 trees in the last 2 weeks to wind. And I thinned my property out like crazy last year.
That's why you had trees fall down.
Right? Oh, no, I know.
Fall.
No, I know.
Anyway, any other comments? Okay, I think we're done with that section unless you have something else you want from us.
Good. Thank you very much. Thanks for your engagement with this. Obviously, this is a big part of what you do for the community in the year is priorities. And of course, we'll come back to you as opportunities emerge.
Great, thank
Make
you.
any motions on this, or you just take our information?
You've provided clear direction.
Okay.
And this is very helpful. Thank you.
Everybody want a 5-minute break? Since we're down on commissioners at the moment, let's take 5.
Thank you.
Convene the meeting. We back on? Perfect. All right, we're back. Next agenda item we have is we have a work session on clear and objective housing text amendments, goal 5. And Tanya Saltzman, you're up.
Pardon me, technical difficulties. Good evening, commissioners. For the record, Tanya Saltzman, Senior Planner. I'm going to share my screen for a presentation. See that. I'd also like to, I'm just to note that I'm officially cursed whenever I try to present a presentation and it won't let me do it in presentation mode. So I'm just going to like scooch down on this, and it's slightly awkward, but hopefully you can all see it. I'd also like to note that we have our esteemed consultants from MIG on the line here. We have Kate Rogers and Matt Hasty here. They've helped us. They were introduced to you probably in the module 2 of the clear and objective process that Tarek led, and they've been tremendous, and they're here to help answer questions. They'll be here for the hearing as well. I anticipate probably a larger role for them at the hearing, but feel free, Kate and Matt, to jump in wherever you'd like. And thanks for being here. We appreciate it. So this is a work session, and you can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a work session for the clear and objective housing text amendments, module 3. These are pertaining to goal 5 related chapters. Just as an FYI, the record and the project website can be found at this very shortened URL. It's bit.ly/Deschutes Clear and Objective Goal 5. Real short, but that's the best we could do. So you can get all of the record materials, application materials, notices, all of that there. As we receive more items for the record, they'll be added in that spot. So first, the background and overview, and I'd like to point out that you have heard a lot of this before. This is, as I noted, this is module 3 of the clear and objective process, which we've already discussed a little bit tonight already. And I'm going to just repeat some of what the basic premises of this project and then our responsibilities as staff are to get this done. So if you hear me speak and you feel like you've heard it before, you are correct. And so I'll try to go relatively quickly, but essentially this project is responsive to state law. As we discussed earlier today, this is due to be effective on July 1st, 2025. The goal is to support housing supply through limiting local governments to, quote, clear and objective standards relating to housing development. Basically, the goal is to avoid discretionary code language that can, maybe either slow the development of housing, stop it, get rid of language that I think Will has noted might be a little ambiguous, might be subject to some sort of interpretation, either by applicants, by people assessing the application, that type of thing. The idea is to make it clear and objective, predictable. As noted previously, the statute does allow local governments to offer a discretionary alternative as well. So if that's that kind of two option system. This provides the flexibility for applicants if they have a funky situation or something different, or they want to go above and beyond or do something a little bit different. We are providing those two options in many of these cases. A little bit about the proposal and the methodology for this. As we've discussed previously, staff has identified areas that we've decided are not in compliance. So words like compatible or similar things to that. We audited our code throughout basically our entire code, which is not insignificant. And then we broke this into distinct segments. As I noted, this is module 3. There's more modules after this. Not sure exactly how many, but we'll talk about that later. So we're doing these in chunks to try to make them a little bit thematic, a little bit more palatable to the Planning Commission, the board, the public, and to just insulate them a little bit in case some part might be appealed, the other parts would remain standing, just so that we would be complying with state law. This is, as I noted, the third amendment package. You've already gone through Module 1, the definitions, which are in effect already. And Module 2, Title 17, which you discussed earlier tonight. Tonight, we're looking at provisions of Title 18 related to Goal 5 protections that are related to housing and housing development. So as a reminder, the state law only pertains to language affecting housing. If it affects other stuff and isn't clear and objective, it's not part of this wheelhouse. In general, Goal 5 per the statewide land use system pertains to natural resources, scenic and historic areas, and open spaces. Things like historic areas, historic resources, those are addressed in different sections of the code, so those are not part of this. But they are considered a Goal 5 resource. That's the overarching term that governs those type of uses, protections, and resources. The general approach is to retain the existing regulations, which in most cases are discretionary where possible. And then where there are discretionary provisions, we're proposing the two-track system. And you're probably familiar with this from the previous module. So in most cases, the existing track is discretionary. In some cases, we've tidied it a little bit. And then the second track is the clear and objective, and that's mostly the new items here. And we try to spell that out pretty clearly in the code, saying discretionary option, clear and objective option, to make this as clear. So now just a summary of the amendments. Goal 5. We've discussed this a little bit tonight. As I noted, Goal 5 governs natural resources, scenic and historic areas, and open spaces. So this package of code addresses the following sections: landscape management combining zones, wildlife area combining zone, sensitive bird and mammal habitat combining zone, rimrock setbacks, wetlands fill and removal. And there are associated chapters in Title 19 of our zoning code that do relate to some Goal 5 resources. Those are going to follow at a later date. We kind of went back and forth on our approach to this, but we wanted to get the Title 18 Goal 5 sections kind of nailed down, agreed upon by the Planning Commission, the board, et cetera. And then we will kind of backfill those Title 19 to just reflect Title 18. It was just tidier. And just there are other things that we might tweak in Title 19 to just make it nice and neat. This amendment package also addresses cluster and plan developments, some of which touch Goal 5, and some of them go a little bit beyond Goal 5 because they kind of overlap. And this I would say is the most important slide in this presentation. So the proposed amendments don't alter the acknowledged Goal 5 inventories or the impact areas. So there's been a lot of talk about our mule deer experience a couple of years ago. So that is very different from what we're doing in this package. The mule deer inventory update was an update to the inventory. So it was an update to the polygon on the map where everything was, and to the rules governing that mule deer inventory. So we were looking to perhaps change that level of protection. Let's protect this a little more, let's protect this a little less. Let's change the level of protection. This does not alter that. We're not touching the polygons. The goal is not to touch the rules. The goal is to be a language patch, essentially, to create a clear and objective, option that is clear and objective, but achieves the same level of protection. So it's not a value change or a policy change. And I think that's just really important with Goal 5, maybe a little bit less so with the previous modules, but the idea is to be apples to apples. We're not making any shifts in sort of philosophies or that type of thing with these amendments. It's meant to be a patch, essentially, a highly technical patch. And I just want to reiterate that. So those existing Goal 5 inventories went through a process to get them approved back in the 90s, as those of you who went through the mule deer process probably heard me explain. There was a process by which ultimately the board weighed the different values in the EC analysis, economic, social, environmental, and energy, looking at, if we limit the resource, if we allow it, how will this affect things? So they did all of these matrices to look at those things, and ultimately at the end of that spit out those resources, and that's what were adopted. We're not changing those things. We are looking to achieve that same level of protection that's based on the previously approved Goal 5 resources. So just wanted to emphasize that. So far, we've received no public and agency comments to date. And then the future amendments, as I noted, you can look forward to additional modules of this. Title 19 will be, like I said, likely updating the Goal 5 resources there, as well as some other clear and objective pieces that have emerged from this process, as well as additional sections on development of housing. I know our planner, Kyle Collins, is working on one as we speak that will follow after this one. The next steps, we are having a public hearing. The Planning Commission is holding a public hearing in 2 weeks, 2 weeks from tonight on April 24th. We look forward to that process to see who's going to come and speak, and we'll go from there. And so the record again is at bit.ly/Deschutes Clear and Objective Goal 5. And the package that I've provided to the Planning Commission contains all the amendments as well as the findings. And that's all I have today.
Great. Any questions?
Any questions?
Commissioner Williams.
I will probably email you a couple. It was, as you said, don't print this packet. I'm trying to read through all of it. So I was a little quick trying to get through the very last section.
And just as an FYI, for you for the meeting, just to give it to you, you can let us know and we can do that. Maybe not 900 pages.
Were there, like with the last ones we did, there were words that seemed to be the very repetitive, like, cut and paste and just drop. What would you say was the biggest clear and objective for Goal 5?
I think
does it mirror the other ones, or
style? Certainly. I mean, the structure, we aim to have this very consistent. So those going through the application process will understand kind of the path that you have to navigate. I think in a lot of cases we had the discretionary option often has exceptions in it. So it's like, you have to do the following unless you kind of don't want to, and then you consult with someone, or you can maybe have an exception in this particular case. So in many cases, the clear and objective version simply got rid of that exception, which is pretty straightforward. I would say that's kind of the biggest theme, removing exceptions. If you want an exception, you have to go through the discretionary path. In some cases, we codified requirements based on previous experience and previous applications. So a pretty straightforward one is in our landscape management combining zone. We said that something has to be earth tones. And in this case, we gave an actual palette of swatches. That was a very simple one, but hopefully that'll work. It's like, this is the brown you can use instead of just, what's an earth tone, stuff like that. So we just tried to really hone in and make that language more precise. If you want to do a special color, then you are bumped back into that discretionary path. I would say those are the main themes. I don't know if, Will, you have any other thoughts on primary kind of themes of how we did it, but I think it was pretty straightforward. Removing exceptions.
Yeah, again, Will Groves, your planning manager. I think I had maybe built this up too much. I had said that this was going to be the tough one and that there weren't good answers. And as it came down, to the end, I feel there's certainly, we value public input. We value your input. I don't by no means think that this is perfect or the only way to do it, but it's in a lot better shape on today than I thought it was going to be in terms of solving some of these problems. And as Tanya pointed out, most of them, it was, there were provisions that said this needs to be 20 acres unless you work with a biologist, blah, 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 blah. And so we made a clear and objective standard that said this needs to be 20 acres. And if you want to leave that path and talk to a biologist, you still can. So I was surprised by the number of the difficulties in the code that were solved by, removing variation for the clear and objective and remaining it for the discretionary standards, keeping it around. Again, as we talked about in Title 17, some choices were made in some places. Getting apples to apples was a little tricky, and to the extent there's discussion about that, or people see things that may have changed the balance in some way, definitely interested in any perspectives on those things, because that was we were trying to avoid it wherever possible.
Great, thanks. Commissioner Stockamp.
Yeah, I just had a specific question for the MIG consultants, and that's pertaining to, it's the code 18.116.160. It's the rimrock setbacks outside of LM combining zone, and it's for the B, clear and objective standards. It's 0.2 that existing trees and shrubs that are located between the rimrock and the proposed structure shall be retained. What's the purpose of this point that was added in there? I'm just curious, because that can be a really big fire risk of that flammable vegetation with being on rimrock. So I was just curious what the reasoning was for having that point included in the clear and objective standards. So if you could elaborate on that, I'd appreciate it.
Hi, thanks. This is Kate Rogers. Could you give that reference one more time so I can find the section that you?
Oh yeah, and it's on page 41 of 52 in the meat packet, but it's 18.116.160. It's rimrock setbacks outside of LM combining zone, and it's 0.2 under clear and objective standards. And it's okay if you want to provide input afterward too, since this is just the work session. That was just a question that I was curious about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to find that section. I think we tried not to add anything that wasn't in the existing code, but the changes we made were to make the language more precise, or to kind of create a parallel objective provision that would sort of lead to the same outcome as the discretionary language. So I don't believe we added that if it wasn't already there in some form.
Kate, I can jump in on this one. The
Great.
existing code has a provision that says existing trees and shrubs which reduce the visibility of the proposed structure shall be retained. So this, of course, the rimrock standards are entirely a visual, although they may serve a variety of functions. In this case, it's a visual standard. There was a concern some jurisdictions either allow or have seen developed, on rimrock, so on ledges, structures that are either up to and including cantilevered out over the edge. And so the standards in the rimrock section encourage and require pushbacks from those edges to reduce visibility from river users in the canyon was the intended purpose of that. So under the current standard, trees and shrubs and trees which reduce the visibility shall be retained. The problem is the which trees and shrubs reduce the visibility has been a subject of ongoing controversy. It requires photo simulations, and reasonable people can disagree about it. So in the clear and objective lane, it just says you keep them all. If you wanted to say there's reasons not to do that, in fact, fire hazard might be a concern, or that some of these trees and shrubs that are between the rimrock and I are really more fire hazard than screening, and I'd like to see those cleared out. The discretionary standard still remains for those options, and this is a perfect example of where the clear and objective option is you keep them all, and the discretionary option is let's talk.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that clarification.
Any other questions? Yeah, Commissioner.
I have a question on page 212 out of 240. Item F, and this is about design review standards, clear and objective standards. It reads, no driveway access to a designated landscape management road for a dwelling unit shall be permitted.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
What does that mean?
Again, these things all exist in pairs, and so we're taking a look at 1884 is the source chapter for that, and there's a provision, I'm going to find that here for you, that has to do with driveway consolidation. So one of the goals that your four commissioner members engaged in was a concern about trying to limit the number of total driveway accesses to these landscape management roads for visual reasons. And so let me see if I can find the provision now. I think it says wherever possible, the access to a landscape management road shall be consolidated. And so the question of trying to make a paint by numbers version of where it's possible to consolidate an access, all our hair caught on fire. We couldn't figure out how to instrumentalize the situations when and when not consolidating those access might or might not be important. So the goal there, and I'll need to double check the language that they got. The notion is that and Tanya, do you have the new language up? I want to make sure before I get out of this, I want to make sure I'm saying the right part of this.
There.
So no driveway access to a dedicated landscape area shall be permitted. So I think that's a good point on that one. As I think that one probably needs to be needs to be focused on that something like an existing access can be preserved, a single existing access can be preserved under the clear and objective alternative, and that under the discretionary alternative, you would have a kind of a where possible consolidation provision. Certainly, we don't want to make it so there's no way to get to somebody's property in these circumstances. So that's
Figured that was the helicopter access.
yeah, it definitely dropped by drone. Yeah, it's excellent. Thank you so much for that. Mhm.
So, and I did have one that I came across. It's listed in there 2 or 3 times with regard to height calculations.
Mm.
It addresses this exact same one that we addressed a couple of meetings ago, and but it conflicts with what we came up with for that recommendation.
Mm.
So this goes back to the old version of the average of the highest and the lowest from the natural grade.
Mm.
It doesn't address the possibility of the finished grade, which may be significantly different. And it also, back to the same discussion we had before of, it doesn't take into account things like a walkout or daylight basement into the calculations.
Oh, this is an interesting one. I could spend an hour with a whiteboard. I'll try to keep it way shorter than that.
Yeah, and we had this discussion. We had a fairly lengthy discussion before, and you guys came up with, I think, an average of 8 measurements equally spaced around the house as the definition. But like I say, the language in this section conflicts with what we recommended on the last one.
Yeah, let me. I'll be interested to hear your perspective. This one's an interesting one. So, the landscape management combining zone and the base zones, both in the current code, have height restrictions associated with them, and they have different goals they're trying to achieve. So, the general height restriction that applies on all properties is a combination of kind of a visual massing, as well as ensuring that the fire department can service these things so that people aren't building very high structures, trying to keep structures rural in nature. The landscape management combining zone has a separate height restriction in the current code, and its purpose is to limit the visual massing of structures as they are seen from a particular view. So in we made some effort to try to pull this apart, and maybe we need to do more. So you would be subject to a height restriction overall that would be calculated as previously discussed with either a 2-point calculation or in a discretionary review, that 8-point calculation. In the landscape management combining zone, there was some real concern about changes to the landscape. So you could imagine that somebody was on a river, you wouldn't want them to build a 10-foot high earthen mound, the finished grade, and then start putting their house on top of that right next to the river in terms of its visibility, generally speaking. So the natural grade provision there is on purpose and is baked into the existing code, and the clear and objective and existing language are trying to match that. So the new language in the clear and objective section is trying to make as clear as possible how you would go about measuring that visual massing, but it in fact does produce a limitation on that particular face of the house. So the way that I've described this to new planners and people in the community is, if you imagine buying yourself a 30-foot long piece of PVC pipe and marching from the road or the river towards the building, and find that face of the building that is facing the road or river, and planting that pipe as like a flagpole, no part of the structure should be taller than that. And so it's different than the general height calculation in that for structures that are on very steep surfaces, you'll end up seeing almost certainly a daylight basement coming up to maybe what's either a 2-story structure that's a 3-story structure at the on the river facing side, or an increasing number of structure, increasing number of stories as you go down. So definitely specifically allows for and anticipates the possibility of a daylight basement with the notion that it's designed to limit the overall massing. I think I don't know if any of you have driven up, was at Greenwood as you're headed out the way to towards Tumalo Falls, and on the left-hand side before the last roundabout, there's some houses there on some pretty steep hills there that are visually 50 feet tall from the road, and this is specifically designed to prevent that. In a personal note, I did not buy one of those houses for $230,000 because I was afraid my children would fall off that balcony. Whoops! I could have bought another child for that much.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else? Oh, I think we're good then. Thank you.
Very much. So we'll see you in 2 weeks for a public hearing. Probably a similar presentation, and our consultants will be there to answer further questions.
And actually, real quick,
Go ahead.
I was surprised that there was no public or agency comments on this one. Like you said, we thought this was going to be the big,
Right.
and then Rimrock was the most interesting section to read.
Thank you. Sometimes the notice in the papers actually is what triggers some comment. So that's going to be published in a couple days. It's a 10-day thing. But we have it on our website. Hopefully, I think there is plenty of time. Obviously it's going through the Planning Commission first and then through the board, and hopefully that'll elevate it. I think the whole clear and objective project it's a little confusing to the public. I don't know if people want to be involved as much. It's hard. Sounds like it is a very technical project. So it has different feelings than, for instance, the Goal 5 update. But I would have thought on a personal level, just if people saw the words Goal 5 out there, that they'd be lining up down the hall.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Staff comments. Who wants, do you
General.
have anything more?
Thanks. I guess I have a quick update. It's sort of a soft update, but you might recall well, first of all, I'd like to thank our consultants for being involved and sticking around tonight. So thanks, Matt and Kate. But pertaining to other items, RVs, I don't know if any of you are wondering where that landed. It's still in progress. So we're looking to have a meeting with the board in early May for potential consideration of adoption. So I will come back to the Planning Commission when that occurs and update you with what's going on. But just to let you know, it is still out there. We've been working behind the scenes. Staff has to work on implementation and things like the website and forms and things like that. So that's just a little quick informal update on that project.
Thank you. Well,
Yeah, thank you. April 24th, of course, looking forward to deliberations for Title 17 CNO, and of course our public hearing with heading into May 8th with the deliberations for CNO Goal 5 tentatively, depending on a continued hearing in that case. Wanted to note that, of course, watching the budget here, things are in turbulent financial times. Applications are generally down to the Community Development Department with the exclusion, confusingly, of land use, which are very robust. Which is a combination that we usually only see coming out of economic hard times. And so we're watching that all very carefully right now. Budgets are good, and we're watching quietly as what happens. But certainly a lot of discussion in the community about what can happen in terms of building materials and supply chains in the face of changes in kind of federal level financial actions. So definitely watching that. Just a little vignette from our world. Gulf DLCD is engaged in some rulemaking associated with solar energy projects, and those projects, there's a consideration to make sort of a fast track provision for certain solar facilities to make them easier to site. And there's right now they're going through discussions if those would be opt in or opt out. So, would counties be default required to be ready to allow with with less ado solar projects in certain circumstances or not. We've advocated, from a planning perspective, that opt-in is probably better. Opt-out puts us in an unusual position of having to get in front of you and the board and, talk at some length about this particular process. And if we want to make this available by default to people. So, in terms of things that might run ahead of other projects that we so sincerely thought about for the work plan, that has some possibility to turn into something requiring relatively quick action, depending if it's opt-in and we want out, we're going to need to act quickly. If it's opt-out and we want in, we're going to need to act, if not quickly, expeditiously.
So that will come before us.
That would likely find its way before you. At least we'd give you some discussion about it. There may or may not be code language associated with the opt-in. It may just be a board process. Or watching DLCD for that. We talked a little bit about also things forthcoming that the board had shown some interest in local, at least exploring local fire hardening and defensible space provisions. And certainly that has the possibility to run to the front of the list if that's the board's pleasure. And we'll be back your way to talk about that. But those are kind of the main things on my radar right now.
Great. Thank you. Stephanie, do you have anything?
I do not. I'm trying to think if I was writing a few briefs last week, but nothing that would be concerning the
Great. Thank you. Peter.
Yeah, thank you, commissioners. Thank you for your thoughtful consideration of the planning division work plan. I will now work with the board of county commissioners to get that scheduled. I'll be shooting for May 7th public hearing for them to consider the entire work plan. Also in the news, I can't remember if I mentioned this. Probably if I did, it was a tentative date. Thornburg Destination Resort's been in the news the last 48 hours regarding water resources. They have also initiated their LUBA remand. They did that on April 7th. This was pertaining to their modification of conditions and addressing their wildlife mitigation responsibilities. That public hearing, limited de novo, is also scheduled on May 7th with the Board of County Commissioners. So wanted to make you aware of those two dates. And then the Community Development Department, so I mentioned this your last meeting during kind of public comment. There were questions about code enforcement and just CDD's budget in general, and our budget, just as a reminder for anyone who's listening or wants to be aware of or participate in the Community Development Department's budget. That's scheduled for Tuesday, May 13th. So looking forward to that conversation with the board and the budget committee. We're very well prepared. As Will noted, we monitor the development activity. We're definitely, as of right now, in a far better place financially than we were the last couple of years. Which means that I think that's a credit to the team and our staff to just monitor our resources, our service delivery to our customers, our development community. And so, that's going to be a very important date, and looking forward to having that conversation with the board and the budget committee. So those were the only three things that I wanted to bring to your attention, and a very productive meeting today.
Great. Commissioner Hofkamp.
Oh, thank you. Just briefly, appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Peter and staff, to review the work plan. Notwithstanding my comment about our relatively narrow pathway and staff expertise and board purview, I do appreciate actually the opportunity to look at that, consider prioritization. So very interesting where we're going. And then secondly, just a question and then a comment. How many additional tranches of the clear and objective text amendments, approximately, are we expecting?
At least one.
So currently in the pipeline, Kyle Collins is working on a additional module that deals with site plan review and multifamily housing associated with that, as well as our airport safety combining zone. These were flagged as kind of ones that we saw significant ambiguity in and are used with great regularity. After that, I think we would return to the board and see what their appetite was for continuing those projects versus other potential projects that we could engage in, with the notion that recognizing that there's lots still out in the code that's not clear and objective, and hopefully we've guessed right, both, as I mentioned previously, where case law, the legislature, where public interest in those provisions would be. We'll see what comes up, but to the extent that we see an applicant find a way that is unwelcome to the board, a way through the code, that may climb to the top in terms of patching that.
Thank you for that. And then I suppose just an observation, and I too was a little bit surprised at how smooth this last tranche went, and just commend staff with the work that's been done on the bunches that we've seen so far on the clear and objective text amendments. You have what I would view as maybe a well-intentioned but somewhat awkward mandate coming down from the state. And what I've seen in staff as you rotate through different staff taking the lead from Kyle, Nicole, and Tarek, and now Tanya, is a really professional, really nice work with language that attempts to answer a somewhat awkward mandate, in my view, avoids substantive changes and sticks with the notion, as you point out, of language revision. It's a head scratcher for me. I suppose maybe it is for some of you. You're better at holding your tongue than I am. I'm kind of a blabbermouth. But where this is going and what kind of implications it will have when the rubber meets the road, and even, again, well-intentioned but kind of an awkward mandate in regards to, if this is a clear and objective revision, then is the existing language unclear and entirely subjective? But we'll see. We'll see how it plays out with the two tracks. It's kind of a living experiment. But anyway, bravo to you all and your staff for, in many ways, as far as I can tell, leading the state and in this uncharted territory. Thanks for letting me be a part of it.
So, Commissioner Stockamp.
Just want to say thanks for another good, productive meeting. I'm excited that we were able to get our priorities out there for the work plan, and look forward to see where it's going to be heading now over the next year. So, and I look forward to being back in person in 2 weeks on April 24th.
Commissioner Kelly.
No comment. Thank you, staff. Thank you, colleagues.
Commissioner Altman.
I thought this was very productive, and I'm surprised that we are done at this hour. So thank you, everybody, for great, concise, and effective discussion.
Commissioner Keirs.
I agree. Yeah. Thanks for the good organization and leadership. And I agree with Vice Chair Altman. It was really productive and substantive and somehow still efficient. So,
Commissioner Williams.
No comment. Just thank you, everyone.
And I'd just like to thank everybody for we got a lot covered tonight, and we're moving right along on a lot of fairly in-depth topics. So I appreciate it. Thanks.
One quick question. The changes that like writing down the 18.6 and the other one, do you think those will be made before our next meeting?
I think what we'll do is we'll collect all of these and bring them to you in deliberation, just acknowledging, kind of it may turn out that the change that we acknowledge as part of a work session is likely a very helpful change that someone else may vigorously object to in ways that were unforeseen. So we'll let them play out and come to you with deliberations for this. Thank you.